Ever since people began asking what defines us as humans, human violence has been a subject of fascination, conflict, and confusion. We often like to think of ourselves as rational beings. What motivates people to hurt and kill their own species? The answer might be found in evolution. Evolution is change over time in a population through the alteration of allele frequencies. It's often influenced by natural selection. Traits that help individuals survive and give them a better chance of reproducing get passed on to the next generation, while traits that harm an individual's chances of survival and reproduction become less frequent. But to answer whether evolution is really at work in causing lethal violence between humans, we have to decide what the rate of lethal violence would look like if it weren't. The study compiled data on lethal violence within mammalian species and expressed rates of lethal violence as percentages of total deaths, comparing rates for mammals in general to those of our closest mammalian relatives and ancestors. Rates were also determined for human violence based on prehistoric and historical data, both written and physical. Humans, being one of the more recently evolved species, have a range of close living relatives and recent ancestors. Because of this, scientists have been able to carry out studies in humans and our closest relatives, such as apes and other primates. They can compare traits between these closely related species and determine whether they could be linked to genetics. Looking at evolutionary history, there is a visible correlation between rates of violence in modern primates and their evolutionary ancestors. Primates tend to be both social and territorial animals, which is linked to higher rates of violence, and interspecific violence rates are higher among primates and their ancestors than among most mammalian species. Despite development of civilization and advanced technology, humans have not changed much in the broad evolutionary sense since the prehistoric era. Comparing levels of lethal violence of our ancestors to those of modern humans, it was discovered that the levels of aggression are very similar along the evolutionary timeline. Although society has changed, the underlying reasons for conflict still exist. Our ancestors fought over food and to settle disputes over territory and status. Modern humans fight for similar reasons, although newer factors such as monetary wealth, politics, and technology also play a part. Contrary to what we might expect, aggression rates in Paleolithic times are extremely low, about 1%. From the Paleolithic age to the post-classical age, the overarching trend is an increase in human lethal violence. However, the overall percentage of human lethal violence in the modern age was greater than the contemporary age. From age to age, the trend is inconsistent, with considerable drops during the Bronze Age and Archaic times. Human lethal violence has generally increased from the Paleolithic times to post-classical, with some exceptions. While the highest percentage of violence occurred in post-classical times, the overall percentage in the modern age was higher than in the contemporary age. Because the actual rates of lethal violence are consistent with the predictions based on evolutionary ancestors, we can say that there is evidence for a genetic or heritable component to lethal violence. This suggests that there may be a possible evolutionary advantage to intraspecific violence. Looking back at our common ancestors in the human phylogenetic tree has revealed similarities in levels of lethal violence within the same branches but in different clades. This shows how something behavioral could also be related to genetics and alleles. The evolutionary roots of human lethal violence have been debated for over 2 millennia, and the debate still continues today. There have been many studies on the effect of culture on the evolution of human lethal violence, leading to many different findings and hypotheses. Although this study suggests genetics as the primary cause of lethal violence, there are still substantial arguments for cultural and societal factors, as well as individual upbringing and socialization.